14 of the NFL's 16 Week 1 games are in the books, and we already have some new controversies, some old ones once again rearing their head. The league implemented some new rules, a new roughing the passer rule following a raft of injuries to quarterbacks last year, including Aaron Rodgers. That's confusing some fans, and joining me now to break it all down and a bunch more is former All-Pro NFL quarterback and current CBS NFL analyst Trent Green. Trent, good to see you. I assume as a quarterback, you favor the new protections quarterbacks are getting. Explain what they are and why it's a little hard to understand what's going on.
Well, I think it's important to protect the quarterbacks. You consider they're the highest paid players on the field, or usually the highest paid player on the field. Those are your marquee players that drive the fans to the game and put up the big points in that. So I understand why they're trying to protect them. There are a lot of rules in place protecting all the players when you consider some of the targeting rules that are put in, the way that players are hitting with their helmets. Those are rules that have been put in. But specifically for the rules you're talking about, the quarterback rules, there used to be a rule where you couldn't drive a quarterback into the ground. You couldn't lift them and drive them into the ground. Now you can't land on top of them. They don't want you putting all your weight on top of them. And some of it, I saw you put the Aaron Rodgers play from last year where he got hit, and that's what injured his shoulder. That's important to understand when you're taking a quarterback to the ground to not put all your weight on top of him to shift. And that's just an injury prevention thing.
Seems tough for some of these defensive linemen. We saw in the Thursday night game where it's like maybe it's just the laws of gravity causing it.
Right.
Okay, the catch. Obviously, what is and isn't a catch was a big controversy in the NFL last year. Got involved in some important moments in some important games, and so the NFL said we're going to simplify it. How is that working, and how are we supposed to understand what a catch is now?
Well, I think there's a lot more clarity. I think it's been cleared up more. They want to go with the ruling on the field, what the officials see on the field more so than anything, instead of overturning everything.
A lot overturned from New York last year.
There were a ton that was overturned. So they wanted to clarify, make it a little more simplified, and then also to trust the officials on the field. So there will be fewer plays overturned because of New York switching it. If they fit within the guidelines, if there's not clear definitive proof. I know in the game I had yesterday with Greg Gumbel and Bruce Arians, we were in Cleveland for the Steelers and Browns games. There were several plays that it looked like it, and you could assume that something happened, but there wasn't video evidence to clarify, and so they couldn't go on an assumption. They had to just stick with the ruling on the field.
What a game that was. We'll talk about it in a minute, but first the final and probably the biggest controversy, definitely the biggest controversy over the last year plus, national anthem protests. We saw two players in the Dolphins game yesterday. Where do these protests stand, and how do you expect the league will deal with it and weather this controversy over the next 16 weeks?
Well, I think the league came out and they said that there's not going to be a standing specific rule for the year. You know, the owners came with the rule. They jumped out right in the spring and said this is going to be the rule for the year. The Players Association, of course, said, well, wait, you didn't talk to us about it. We've got to come to an agreement on what's going to take place. So the NFL's stance is there won't be a rule in place. Every team handles it how they want to handle it. I think it becomes a national issue, or continues to be a national issue, as our president continues to tweet about it. So every time he tweets about it, he's stirring the pot even more. CBS stance, they're not going to show the anthem if that has been the stance for a long time. And when it's a big news story, then I think that becomes a part of it. But right now, that's not part of the game plan.
Sunday night, Packers-Bears. Khalil Mack, one of, if not the best defensive players in the league, in a shock trade goes to the Bears from the Raiders, and maybe made Raiders coach John Gruden look as foolish as many people thought he might be by dealing Mack to the Bears, and he had a big game last night.
Well, when you consider to make a big splash in the first half that he had a sack, he had a forced fumble, he had a fumble recovery, he had an interception, he had an interception return for a touchdown. He did pretty much everything you could possibly do as a defensive player, all in one half of football, and that's why the Bears got out to a 20-0 lead.
Second half was Aaron Rodgers' half,
yes.
though. Good to see him back. How'd that go?
Well, he left in the first half because of injury, so Packers fans were, not only were they down 20-0, but now was Aaron Rodgers gone for the year? Was he gone for a game? What was going to happen? He comes back in Aaron Rodgers form in the second half and puts a comeback of all comebacks, throws 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, leads them to a win. It was at the end of the first half, you would have said Khalil Mack is not only the defensive player of the year, he's the MVP for the season after one half of football. And then after the second half, you're like, well, I guess Aaron Rodgers is now the MVP.
For the first time ever, My wife not only let me, but encouraged me to get NFL Sunday ticket. Thank you. And so I'm clicking around to the games, and what a game you guys got yesterday. Steelers-Browns. Take us through what was one of the wackiest games we'll probably see all year. And what ended in a tie.
You know, it was one of those crazy games. It rained the entire game. It was a steady rain throughout, so you knew there were going to be some mistakes along the way. The Steelers ended up with 3 interceptions in the first half. They ended up with 6 turnovers total, and the Browns only had 1. And both teams had a bunch of penalties. It was 12 penalties for the Steelers, 11 penalties for the Browns. It was an ugly game. 8 minutes,
but close and fun.
But 8 minutes left in the game. The Steelers are up 21-7. The Browns get 2 late turnovers, 2 late touchdowns, make it 21-21. Get it to overtime. Both teams have a chance for a field goal in overtime to win it. The Steelers go wide left. The Browns get theirs blocked. It was a wild game, and even though there were a bunch of mistakes, it was an entertaining game and a lot of fun to broadcast.
And an embarrassing game if you're the Steelers to tie with their franchise player, Le'Veon Bell, as a holdout. He says if they don't back up the truck and pay him, he's not coming back. Does this embarrassing performance for the Steelers change the calculus at all on that?
You know, I don't think it does. I think Le'Veon's standing his ground. I think he wants a long-term deal. I don't think the Steelers are in position or want to do that at this point in time. They're fine with him playing under the franchise tag. James Conner was the running back that filled in for him, the second year back out of Pittsburgh. He did a tremendous job. I think he had over 130 yards rushing. He had nearly 50 yards receiving. They had big games from an offensive standpoint. Big Ben threw for over 400 yards. So from an offensive standpoint, you want to have a weapon like Le'Veon Bell in the backfield. But when you look at their production, it's hard to argue either side of it in terms of who's going to give in first.
Okay, football's back. Great to see you, Trent.
Yeah, thank you.